Awesome. Ani Kinwaya, thank you guys for zooming in and hanging out with us and spending this time together. We invited you here today because in your own ways you all have direct experience participating in, leading, and organizing Indigenous land-based learning programs and also interfacing with post-secondary institutions. So as we are all now painfully aware, we're in a situation of a global pandemic, and governments and institutions and funders in response to this new reality are pushing for us to move our programming online. This presents a series of challenges for Dechinta and for Indigenous people in terms of our knowledge, our responsibility to our elders and knowledge holders, and our responsibilities to Indigenous students and to the alternative economies that our programs support. So we did an initial webinar with myself and Glen Coulthard and Alex Wilson. Alex Wilson's land-based master program is starting online, has already started online. So she's had to make this switch immediately. At Dechinta, we canceled most of our summer programming, which was supposed to be a 3-week canoe trip down the Decho that was accredited, and we're working to try to do some sort of mixed delivery for the fall. So we had sort of an initial conversation between the three of us, and then last Friday, Kelsey and I had a webinar with all of our community partners and Indigenous alumni from the North to talk about some of the challenges that they were having in terms of land-based learning and this push towards going online. They spoke really eloquently about the lack of internet access in the North, lack of computers and iPads and iPhones in the North. They talked about how upset their elders and knowledge holders are right now, remembering all of the impacts of the 1928 pandemic on their communities. And they talked about how important the kind of land immersive programming is, where they go out on the land for a long period of time with elders and have a chance to experience, often for the first time, what Dene life or what a Dene community, bush community looks like. So this webinar, we wanted to focus on ethics. We wanted to focus on a group of folks that are also interacting with institutions and with universities, and to see if we can come up with some solutions and some, I guess, interim solutions so that our programs and that our knowledge holders and that our students are protected. Because I think one of the big worries in the back of everybody's head is if we move this all to Zoom, then funders and universities can be great. That's a really cheap and efficient way for us to deliver this programming. So yeah, that's why we brought you here. So I thought we could start by just giving brief introductions to ourselves. I'm happy to just really lightly moderate this. So if people can volunteer to kind of speak to the question of Indigenous ethics, land-based learning, and going online, and then kind of play off of each other, that's great. And then kind of an organic discussion can happen where you don't need me. But if that doesn't happen, I'll jolt in with the questions. So Noelani, can we start with you in terms of introductions?
Sure. Aloha mai kākou. O Noelani ko ui noa no Oahu Alua Maiau. My name is Noelani. I live on the island of Oahu in the moku of Kona in the ahupua of Manoa. I work at the University of Hawai'i at Manoa in political science. In relation to the conversation today, the program, one of the programs that we run at UH Manoa is about a 5-year-old program now for undergraduate students that is specifically targeted for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students. It's called Na Ko'oko'o. We try to really build relationships between the students and community organizations who are doing Aina-based, land-based, and ocean-based work that is about feeding communities and revitalizing Hawaiian land-based practices. So that's been a challenge that I can reflect on with you a little bit here. And then I also wanted to just note and also ask permission for my kane, my partner, Imai Kalani. He's a teacher, a high school teacher at a Hawaiian culture-based charter school that's secondary. He teaches in the picture that you're seeing right here. He leads a project that restores taro farming in that area, and he's here. We've both been talking a lot about what this shift to online and COVID social distancing means in our communities and for Hawaiian education. So if it's okay with you for him to listen in and maybe even pop into the discussion, I just wanted to ask that. So anyway, that's me. Aloha kako. Mahalo nui for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be talking with such brilliant colleagues and friends.
Much. Jeff?
Osio Nigada, Doha, Gali Heliga. So Jeff Ganaholido, Corntassel Dagwadoa, Jalagia Yetli, Eguena Sa'i. So it's good to be here. I'm happy to be here today. And my name is Jeff Corntassel. My Cherokee name is Ganaholido. I'm from Cherokee Nation, and I dance at the Achota grounds. And coming to you today from the unceded Lekwungen and Wheelmilk and Wasanich territories. And yeah, I think a lot of my work really has been with Noelani and with Noi Noi back in the day, doing field courses with the University of Victoria and with University of Hawaii Manoa and Indigenous politics. And then more recently, it's been developing field courses through Indigenous studies and land-based courses, and then also doing land-based practices and even mentorship with SAGE and Circle at University of Victoria. So it's an honor to be here. Wado.
Lianne?
Hello, my name is Lianne Charlie. I'm Wolf Clan of the Tagé Hudän Big River people from South Central Yukon. Also an instructor at Yukon University in the Indigenous Governance degree program, and a PhD student, candidate, almost done, in the Indigenous politics program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Really honored to be part of this conversation, at the very least, just to witness and listen. We are still developing the land-based components of our degree. We haven't even started a conversation about what that's going to look like, possibly in the winter for our students. So really curious to see where this conversation goes. Also have participated and been a guest faculty member at Dechinta, so prepared, I guess, to speak to that, and can't even imagine what that could look like online. So masicho, looking forward to where this conversation goes.
Heidi?
Bujo and Dinaway Maganadug, Kiiwetinepinisiik Indigo, Buju and Dodem, Mikanakwa Juing Nindunjaba. I'm Heidi Stark. I'm an associate professor at the University of Victoria and also the director for the Center for Indigenous Research and Community-Led Engagement, where we had a chance a couple years ago to bring folks together, Leanne and Glen part of that as well, to talk about research ethics, but without thinking about it in terms of COVID impacts. So it's great to get to revisit the topic today. I also have had the opportunity to teach land-based law camps with John Barrows, primarily out of his community in Cape Croker, but have also taught some law camps with Valerie Wabus in Wappo Island. And so happy to kind of share any insights from those experiences, and have had a chance to teach just once for Dechinta and participate once in the iGov University of Hawaii exchange. So thanks for having me here, and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Alex?
Hi everyone, Dance. I'm Alex Wilson from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. I'm at home, and that's the Clearwater Lake behind me. It's our traditional, part of our traditional territory. In Cree, the word is a tigameg, which actually means whitefish. And I'm really glad to see some of you, not in person, but kind of live. I know that Heidi, you're over at we're at the Jackman Humanities Institute, and I was there last year, and others, of course, I've read some of your work, so it's exciting to be a part of this. So we have a master's in Indigenous land-based education at the University of Saskatchewan. This is the 10th year, and the cohort that's graduating this year, I'll be, I think, the 90th students that are going to be going through it. So they're all teachers or administrators in First Nations, or doing some kind of land-based education in their schools that they're at. And they're from all over. So we've had quite a few from Hawaii, and this year we've got Jemez Pueblo and Zia Pueblo, and then all across the land, really. So this COVID has really impacted us, because this was their last two courses. So one of them is Queering Indigenous Land-Based Ed, and then the other one was their capstone. And we had planned a canoe trip down the Saskatchewan River in the Delta especially, which is also in our territory here. So we've been trying to talk to others to see what's possible in terms of, doing this remotely in a way that they're still going to gain something out of it, rather than just doing readings and that kind of thing. So I'm excited to hear what the rest of you have to say.
Thanks, Alex. Glen? You're on mute.
Still haven't gotten used to this Zoom life. Hi, everybody. I'm Glen. Obviously, I know all of you, and I'm glad that you've joined us here for this conversation. I'm Leda Dene of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation. I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia in the Critical Indigenous Studies program, as well as the departments of Political Science and Geography. I am also been working with Dechinta on land-based educational contexts for 10 years now. And I'm just glad that everybody has kind of put our minds together to try and think through some of the issues that this present context has put us in order to keep doing the important type of community-based learning that we all do in a way that holds up the ethics and politics of our communities. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Merci.
Glen, can you just start us off by talking about some of the ethical issues that you've been thinking through in terms of Dechinta and how we are operating through COVID? And then if you make it super interesting, then other people will want to speak next.
Well, I'll try and make it into, it's urgent. So even if it's not super interesting, we've been placed in a situation of urgency. So like as Leanne had mentioned in the introduction, like most Indigenous communities, the North has been faced almost, it seems like, in decade cycles with with pandemic-like cycles of either influenza or originally smallpox or now COVID, H1N1, which kind of brings back this history of invasion and intrusion and colonial dispossession. So the North really takes this seriously. And one of the things that they've clamped down on is travel within the North, but also making sure that everything that is taking place adheres to the most kind of up-to-date facts-based sorts of health protocols. So this means, as being educators in the North who work in a land-based, very intimate community context, it puts us in a tricky situation because we have to be able to continue delivering this decolonial sort of programming, redistributing resources from our organization back into the community so that they can feed their families, they can feed the community, they can keep those traditions alive in this context. But we're also having to adhere to this push in terms of safety regulations that is wanting us to be able to offer this type of education in a virtual online context. So in the conversations that we've had as collectively as a group, we all recognize that that's impossible. The type of education, the type of learning, the ethics and politics of what we do, being deeply engaged with community, like in consultation with community in terms of what we deliver, how we deliver it, where we deliver, what's being taught, who's teaching, all requires very careful face-to-face sort of relationships. And our concern is that without a public or a government sort of context that doesn't understand that, it would be very easy to see this transition to something that could be done for significantly cheaper in an online context. So we're forced to kind of navigate this push to do this work safely out of force of circumstance, but also really make very certain that what we're doing cannot be replaced by this type of learning. The other thing that we really want to take seriously from my perspective is like the type of community work and the land-based work that we're doing really kind of has a history in the kind of political economy and political struggles of the Dene Nation for autonomy and self-determination and a reclamation of our lands. So one of the initial proposals that were kind of floated around in the 1970s when we were thinking about these issues and then into the 1980s was using our institutions that we build as a means of redistributing resources into community, so it would make that on the life or on the land mode of life sustainable again, because once capitalism had kind of seeped into the North, Dene men and women and young folks had to start giving up some of their life on the land that they would prefer to live in order to integrate themselves into the emerging wage economy. And what Dechinta is doing is trying to make sure that we can support that work on the land by redistributing economic resources from other places into the hands of elders and land users and artists and what have you, instructors. So we really need to be able to keep doing that. And this is I think we kept referring to it as the stopgap. This is the demands that we're meeting in order to keep operating so that we can keep doing land-based education. But we want to think collectively with you on how to do that, which still stresses the urgency of face-to-face on the land learning, where this venue is not sufficient to replace that. Just in terms of some of the stuff we've been doing, like in most contexts in Canada and the US, we've been adhering to the public health office in terms of how we go about operating our work. We've been the folks home base in Yellowknife have been putting together bush kits to provide to community members, so it gets them out of harm's way safely on the land. People have been working to the for the most part, like Leanne and I and others, from where we're holed up in the south. So I'm calling from Musqueam territory right now in Vancouver. And we've been redistributing again resources into the community, so our staff and instructors and elders can get out onto the land, harvest meat and other stuff to redistribute back into the community, and to educate in a smaller scale. So we have folks taking out nephews and nieces and their kids and kind of documenting the knowledge that they're transmitting across those generations and through those families, to show how significant this is, even in a crisis situation.
Heidi, can you maybe talk about some of the concerns, ethical concerns that you might have in taking the things that happen and the learning that happens directly between students and elders and knowledge holders and ceremonial leaders on the land and bringing that online?
Sure. Did I mute myself or unmute? I think I'm good, right? Okay. I mean, so far what I've heard, at least with regards to the law camps that we were providing, is that we're just not doing them. So one kind of ethical concern I have is about the kind of gap it's producing for, like in that context, it's predominantly first-year law students right before they like actually start law school. And for some, it's their second or third year, but it's a kind of crucial moment of intervention in which we can do some work to try to shape how they think about what is law, before being so deeply entrenched within a kind of Canadian legal training. And so it's, a bit alarming that despite the work that many have done to make sure this is an ongoing thing every year for, upward of 50 or so students, that won't be taking place. And for many of them, I do think it has long-lasting impacts for how they think about their role as lawyers, judges, legal practitioners, both in how they engage with broader Canadian society as well as with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities. And I think when, we look to what's going on in the midst of this global pandemic with awareness around anti-Blackness and Black Lives Matter and police brutality against Indigenous peoples, that kind of intervention is all the more important. So kind of one ethical concern I have is about the kind of absence that will occur in many contexts in which we're not able to respond fast enough to make shifts to provide some kind of filler in this kind of moment. I know I would think for a lot of elders and knowledge holders and practitioners, there's also this deep concern around a kind of rupture of relationships that's happening with so much social distancing. And even within families, it can be difficult, especially when you have people with compromised immune systems and elderly members of the community you're trying to protect. I think it's producing more concern around how to properly engage in ways that create still protections, and therefore, again, producing contexts in which people just aren't. So in a number of our communities, ceremonies are not happening because there really is no way for us to do some of those ceremonies in ways that would meet contemporary health guidelines. And yet those are ceremonies that largely occur to produce healing and are like of deep medical necessity for a number of people. And I think like if, right now, I think a lot of the communities have paused what normally happens in June in the hopes that they'll be able to carry forward some of that work in late July and August. But if we find that another wave comes forward and that's an unavailable option, I think communities are going to be getting more and more concerned about how to address the kind of mental, physical, and spiritual health needs of communities and community members if we don't find ways to both, I think, kind of restore some of those kind of day-to-day, everyday relationship tactics, as well as find ways to carry out the kind of necessary healing practices for our communities. I could say more, but maybe I should pause and see if others have something to add, or
maybe I'll jump in. Yeah, I appreciated all those points, Heidi and Glen. And I was thinking as UVic suspended face-to-face student meetings and classes, I was in the middle of a land-based course, and we were doing restoration work at Sneakwith, which is the place of the blue grouse. And so that restoration work stopped. And so there's no way that we could envision doing restoration work, where you need people, knowledge holders, you need other people to guide you through that, but also there's a group setting there that you need to not only for kind of safety, but also because we're kind of out in the woods. Even in Victoria, we're still a little bit almost semi-urban, and also the need to pull the right things, pull the right invasive species, and to plant the right way. So in that sense, I think we run the ethical risk of superficiality in our engagements if we shift to an online format, where we can talk in more general terms about some of the work that needs to be done. We can talk about ceremony. Our Achota grounds in Oklahoma, they're still going ahead with some of our ceremonies, and they said that they meet a social distancing requirement, but I'm not going to be able to go for ceremony, for example. So not everyone's going to be able to engage. And in that sense, I'm not going to have that ability to take in medicine for the year and things like that. So I think a lot of people are experiencing these same things where their health is compromised, and they're making decisions or decisions in some cases are made for them. The other thing I was going to mention was, in a sense, a lack of accountability, especially I can envision courses that encourage individuals to go out onto the land and give them kind of basic guidelines and say, hey, here's 10 flowers, or here are 10 plants, or here 10 things to look for and take pictures of, but it's without the adjoining protocols. It's without that kind of mentorship that's more directed, that's more, guiding. And in that sense, I would worry about how that work is undertaken, especially in a more individualized format versus a more collective or group format. So those are just some things that came to mind, especially as the term was abruptly ended for us. And I was in the middle of a land-based course, and it was very disjointed after that. A lot of the projects weren't able to be fulfilled. And I think the people that were leading us in this and guiding us in this project were a bit frustrated because at that point, the work had to stop, and it's vital restoration work that has to get done. So
I can take a turn, or maybe I should say a little bit about the different sort of context here. As you know, Hawaii's under U.S. occupation, and right now the facts about medical guidance related to COVID doesn't really matter in the U.S. So it's been an interesting kind of mix of things that are going on here. We had the immediate shutdown, like you all, and like so many Indigenous nations, I think the experience with pandemics and the loss of population in the past, as well as the deep reverence and value of elders and kupuna has made it such that a lot of folks really just were very compliant with stay-at-home orders. The other big thing, though, was that tourism was shut down. So it was learned very early on that the cases that were coming in were because of travel and tourism. And so once tourism shut down, although it's had a huge economic impact here in the islands, it pretty much, I mean, the curve went very flat. And so we've had very little incidence of spreading. A side benefit of tourists not being here is, we have up to 10 million tourists a year, which is about 8 times larger than the population. So many of our, beaches and mountain trails, like there are just a ton of things where we're seeing nobody there, and the way that allows other life to flourish. So there's benefit, I think, to that for us. In terms of education, though, as you all were saying, there was an immediate shift to online for both the university as well as all the public schools. My kids go to Hawaiian language immersion schools, and our experience was that the online just didn't work for them at all. For my students, I wasn't teaching a land-based course this semester, but I noticed that among my students, particularly the Native Hawaiian and other groups that are underrepresented within the university, experienced more anxiety about having to go fully online. And access was an issue for some, for sure, but more important than access was that the mental health and anxiety kind of component of it. The Naka'ōko'o program that I mentioned earlier, I was still helping to administer it this year, but Heoli Osorio is actually leading it. And one of the things they just concluded, so they were together from January through June. And that program requires, typically going out on the land, working with a lot of community organizations. And that shut down as of spring break. So what she found, though, was that the students were absolutely insistent that they needed to keep meeting in some way, even if it was only online, because of that mental health and anxiety kind of aspect of it, that they really needed a support system, and being able to have that community, even in a stopgap way, like you mentioned, was important for them. The other big thing that happened here in Hawaii at the time was, we were still in the middle of a fight around protecting Mauna Kea, and the Pu'uhonua, the place of refuge that had been sustained since July, basically had to shut down and go home, and in large part because the kupuna, the elders, were such a big part of holding that line, and nobody wanted to endanger their health. And they had many discussions about whether they should stay, or some people should stay and others should go home. But eventually it was decided that should shut down. So that's had a big dampering sort of impact on our communities too, because the momentum and the way that movement inspired people who had never been inspired before to get educated and involved in Hawaiian cultural revitalization and ceremony and all those things were really starting to, it was just, the momentum was really building, and then all of a sudden it kind of had to go quiet for a while. But then right now, I mean, what's interesting, I think, is that the Black Lives Matter uprisings of this moment have really blown that back open, and that this here in Hawaii in the last couple of weeks, that's what's brought people out again. So I don't know where to go with that exactly. But I just also wanted to mention that I really liked Jeff's idea about, you know, using the opportunity for people to connect with the land that they're on, wherever that is, and the rhythms of that place. I think one of the concerns for our some of our practitioners is how sharing that online could potentially be misused in terms of state surveillance or accessibility to, you know, visitors or other folks. So being really careful about what kind of information about the natural resources that exist and where they are, you know, that they not be so widely shared. So that's one concern. And then, like Heidi was talking about the need for ceremony, the real need for ceremony. I think that's something that, as I mentioned with Mauna Kea, was huge because there was aha held every day, 3 times a day, as part of that struggle. And that really brought to many Kanakas' lives who hadn't experienced ceremony in that kind of way before. Don't put it in right now. How powerful and healing ceremony could be, and, you know, unifying and all these things. And so again, that has also gone pretty silent. So just wanting to echo that need for ways to find space for ceremony.
Alex or Leanne?
I won. I was hovering over my mute button thinking maybe you would jump in there, Alex, but here I am. This has been really helpful to hear. I'm currently not teaching, and I haven't taught this year and haven't had to teach, didn't teach through the pandemic at all. It was very much close to home. But my world got very, very small, I'm sure, like a lot of you have experienced. So just thinking about some of these concerns, pressures, and urgencies that Dechinta is facing, I'm going to come at it, I think, slightly from a different approach. Because I'm trying to imagine, having just been at Dechinta last fall, what took place there, and then think a little bit about these technologies that we have at our disposal, or some of us have at our disposal, and some of us don't, and imagine how those things even come together. And one thing that you mentioned this at the beginning, Leanne, about sort of the intimacies of camp and camp life, the closeness that I think is a big part of what makes the Dechinta experience so transformative, and that you are spending such intimate time with people, intergenerational, from kids all the way to elders. And people are having an emotional and spiritual experience alongside their academic and their academic experience. And what Dechinta provides is this emotional and spiritual infrastructure to support people to go through what is a very emotional learning experience. And imagining, like right now, I'm alone at my house, I'm sitting in my kitchen, I can't see my neighbors from here, I can't see anybody, I haven't heard anybody walking by or anything. And to imagine interacting with my students through this medium, or with other participants, and learning what you learn in addition to coursework, and then switching off and being here alone for some people is going to be facing some pretty intense and heavy material. So I think that disconnect alone, the ethics of leaving students or participants alone on their learning journey, especially as it's been shaped so intentionally by Dechinta, I think is unethical. I also think that intimacy can't really be replicated online. You could support folks to go and connect with the places that they are physically in alone, and sort of try and curate that for them, and have them come back and share online. But that connection through people that you get in camp, you don't get through this this medium. And I think that also speaks to the physicality of what you learn at Dechinta, how you use your body, what you learn with your body by doing things, watching other people do things. You're learning physical skills. These things could be explored on your own as well. But that experiential component, the witnessing, the listening, it's almost like, well, the land, you have to do those things when you're at camp. If you want to be warm, be fed, you're having a very physical experience too. So the ethics of removing that component from the Dechinta programming, from a land-based experience, I think, it's not even, I think it's inappropriate to work so hard to try and recreate that here, or online, or alone. Those are the thoughts that came to my mind first.
Thanks for that. I been thinking a lot about that spiritual aspect. And then as I was listening, thinking about some of the things that I've been seeing online right now of people sharing kind of their land-based, whatever they're doing, but it's just becoming kind of an inventory of, land-based activities without that spiritual component. So people are like learning how to do like recipes, kind of almost like, creating these books or inventories of all these tasks they can do outside, how to skin an animal, how to fillet a fish, and all that, which are important, but it's missing that kind of spiritual connection to taking a life and how to take care of that. And then I was also thinking, but then when you think about the ceremonial aspect, maybe this is a time when we can actually listen and learn from queer people, because we've been excluded from ceremony for a long time and have had to find ways, creative ways and sustaining ways to understand what ceremony actually means. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in a huge kind of formalized gathering, or even any kind of formalized gathering. So I'm just thinking of things that some of my friends do, or I've tried to do over the years, and how, that maybe I should talk to, maybe others can talk about that as well. So what are some of the things that have sustained you spiritually? And then I was also thinking about the notion of kinship and natural law and all that, and how can you learn that without being out there breathing it. So there's that. And then I was thinking about just the critique that some people have of land-based education as the way we have it structured ourselves, and myself included, is, like we do a lot of travel to other territories. That's part of the work that we do. And so this notion of micro-travel can be really important right now, and understanding not just the context in the land where you are, but like even going to a more minute level. And like last year, we had our students just kind of be in relation with a little tiny square piece of dirt, and understanding, observing, and understanding everything that's in that. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about as people have been talking. And for our group, the students this summer, some of the ways that we're addressing this so far is by, there's a small group of 6 out of the 20 that are doing their own canoe trip in the territory where they are working and living. And not all of them are from that territory, and they're crossing different ancestral homelands. So part of what they're doing is they're approaching each of the host nations that are on that river system to get permission, and that's taking a long time because obviously they can't go there, but they have to find someone through a relational way who's connected to somebody who can give the permission. So that's been a lesson as well, that wow, we should be doing this all the time, and sometimes we don't. And then the other issue really that I've been worried about lately is the safety, just the safety of them out on the land. And not that I have more knowledge about safety than them, but just kind of a different role when you're responsible for them. So figuring out how they're going to attend to the different needs of the group. But I think one of the ways that they've dealt with that is by they self kind of organized around who's going to go on that small trip, which kind of mitigated some of the potential safety concerns from students that may not necessarily be comfortable or as safe on that trip. So those are just a few things that I've been thinking about as we've been talking.
Great, Alex. I was thinking when you were talking about that spiritual and ceremonial component, and Heidi as well, how we can't have those big formalized gatherings right now, but how in Nishnaabeg culture, there's sort of almost an older, where you are spending a lot of time on the land with just your family, less formalized, less performative, put tobacco out in the morning at sunrise. Little things like that our elders still do, and that our elders have always done. And I think that the queer community has also practiced those because they're not formalized and because they're not performative, and because of that exclusion. So a couple of younger Anishinaabe people, actually from the north, have reached out and asked over the phone how to smudge, or are there things that they can be doing through the pandemic with whatever they have and whatever the situation. And is it okay to be doing that? Like almost asking permission. Is it okay for me to put some tobacco in a fire in my backyard, even though I don't really know what I'm doing? And so that's been kind of a cool opportunity, I think, that I've been able to connect with kind of just individual students over that. I was also thinking about how, particularly at Dechinta, because it's such an intense and immersive land-based program, that I was thinking of this with Lianne when you were talking, that almost like 90% of what I think students learn is not it's not anything from Glen and I or the readings. It's about how to live without the internet, how to solve conflict with the people that they're trapped on this tiny island with for 6 weeks, about how to manage their emotions, about there's always some point in the semester where one or two students will be like, the elders are not teaching me anything, like, what's wrong with you guys? And it's because they don't know how to, the elders are getting up an hour before dawn and working. And if you're working alongside them, the stories are just flowing out of them. But if you're sleeping until 9:30 and then dragging your ass to class, you missed all that. So sort of teaching, and then also just teaching that witnessing, like watch what the elders are doing, watch how hard they're working, watch how they handle conflict, watch how they handle joy, watch how they're managing the energy of the whole camp so everyone doesn't spiral downwards into a pit of despair and we freeze to death. So all of that stuff, which I think is so vital to like life learning, and so vital to Indigenous learning, is stuff that just that we just can't do without that immersive environment. So I like actually the idea that of some of you, like, we just can't do this right now. we'll have to figure out other things that we can do, because there just isn't a way of ethically doing that. But then I also hear that that gap that creates, and that's also an ethical concern.
Yeah, I think just kind of when Leanne Charlie was speaking and saying how it was difficult to do this ethically, or perhaps that online can't cope with, or even more firmly might be like a non-ethical way to do this type of work. It got me thinking, because like for the last 10 or so years, and thinking through these issues as an academic theoretically, I've come to learn that the kind of ethics of my community, and I think it probably extends to more Indigenous communities, is grounded in practice. It is grounded in that relationship that you have to sustain with land over time through that practical engagement with it, from learning from it. And that gives you the kind of normative frameworks for evaluating what's right and wrong, like what's better, what is morally abhorrent, like all these sorts of things is through that practical relationship that you establish with others and the land, like over time. So in a kind of meta sense, since this is the academic webinar, I don't think that you can technically or like learn an Indigenous ethics from doing it like this, because it requires that those relationships being cultivated and renewed over time with both the land itself, but also the others in your community who you're learning together with. So when I was originally thinking about ethics and this kind of medium, I was thinking about more issues of commodification, like the commodification of knowledge, or the like gutting out of the like whether it's spiritual or whatever, gutting out of that knowledge what's important by virtue of putting it virtually online. Or ethical considerations in terms of where's this data stored, and all this sort of stuff when we're talking about it on Zoom, or what sort of recompense are we giving back to the community in terms of compensation that we're giving back to the community in terms of what they're sharing with us, when this is such an easy venue to kind of like, oh, well, just talk to you for a bit. That absolves, we're not going to give you the $300 or $500 or whatever dollars it is required that we would normally have on a daily basis, so you can put food on your table. So I was thinking of it quite shallowly until this conversation, because you can't actually derive our DNA ethics from this context. It's antithetical to the production of that of our from an ethical like framework when it's done in this abstract commodified sort of context. This isn't these aren't actual relationships. They're approximating it in a certain way, but this is not a ethical relationship, I don't think, or a relationship that derives substantive ethical insight into the world from an Indigenous context. So yeah, no, I think that this has been very helpful for me to think through some of the issues at a deeper, more substantive level than what we're doing with the information. How are we giving back to the community? Those concerns are important, but there's something deeper at play here.
I don't know what the requirements are there, or the around how much people can gather, but I've been thinking a lot about how we can gather in very small groups. Like from the beginning it was, if it's less than 10 people within your household or family, it's fine. And in many ways I feel like this is actually forcing us to think about how trying to fit the kind of work that we do on the land or in Indigenous education into the school setting and the demands of how many students and in what schedules and whatnot, just don't make it possible. But it actually is possible for us right now if we didn't have to go to school or work online to do the kind of education where we have small groups of, a dozen or so people who are at the lo'i or at the fish pond or wherever you are. So I don't know. I mean, even with the nonprofit industrial complex, like a lot of the nonprofit groups that I know, they're the folks who run them are still maintaining that kuleana, that the relationship to they have to continue to be on the land, but they can't gather the same kind of large groups that you can count the numbers in order to provide that to funders to say, okay, this is how we're impacting our community. So it's really pushing us, I think, and it can be an opportunity to think about how to move beyond schools and wage labor and nonprofit funding. So yeah, that's just kind of, I'm curious about whether that's also possible for you all, or are there different kinds of barriers to gathering people in very small groups on the land that you're experiencing?
Over here in our territory and our nation, I think it depends from nation to nation. Like we have a really strict policy, and other nations have roadblocks set up so people can't go in or out even. And then even within our territory, like we also have a strict curfew, and so that's restricted even families going hunting and stuff. So, but the town, which is in our territory, doesn't have the same restrictions. So they're going out fishing like this is just a big holiday. And, a few weeks ago, well, actually a month ago, they found like 12 moose that were just massacred for no reason. And so there's a lot of this kind of thing happening too without our hunters and trappers and fisher people being out there that normally kind of monitor who's doing what.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you all were saying, and when you said, Leanne, that getting up before dawn, right, and visiting with elders and having that different experience, and then even Noi talking about how we're often trying to fit land-based courses into a university schedule. So for me, a lot of it is about different senses of time and how time is impacted. Cherokees have this notion of dohi, which means peace, but it also in a deeper sense means living according to a pace of nature. And so to what degree can you have a pace of nature on a Zoom call? And I have yet to figure that out. But in a sense, a land-based class, even in the course of a semester, is already being regulated for the time, the natural flow of things, how things could take place. And then that seems to get further confined when we put it into an online space of, an hour and a half where we're visiting with each other in very isolated, as Leanne pointed out, in very isolated ways. So yeah, I was just thinking about time and even safety. I think, I love the point that Alex made about safety and how, that really violates in some ways, when I'm telling students to go out individually, that violates a sense of gadugi or that sense of community camaraderie, right? I'm telling them to go out on their own. And so with very little guidance and then very little accountability, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, it's a tough thing to navigate even in the best of circumstances. And then thinking about how, it becomes a challenge to our ways of expressing ourselves fully.
One of the things that has come up for me in this conversation has been, and I'm still reflecting on some of the kind of early words shared by Alex. Oh, did I just lose everybody? Nope, there you are. Is that I find that this also could provide a great opportunity, and maybe this is some of the conversation you guys are having with community and knowledge holders and practitioners, but it could be such a great opportunity for us to be engaged in dialogue around like why certain protocols take the form they do and can expose some of the exclusionary aspects of those as not being as quote unquote steeped in tradition as we might think, or as we often talk about in community. But I wonder how those conversations unfold when you can't actually engage with people in the same kind of like relational way because of these COVID restrictions, you know, because one of the things I keep thinking of when thinking of like just Anishinaabe protocols and practices is how we reach out and ask for particular guidance when you can't physically give tobacco to another person. And just that different elders and knowledge holders have different kind of responses to that, where some might be comfortable with you putting out that tobacco and it's doing that work, and others need it to be like physically in their hand for that to happen. And but as Alex was talking, it made me think about how a lot of different protocols and practices we engage in, we do with a certain kind of just habit without giving lots of thought to the form it takes. That might also be deeply ingrained with all kinds of other restrictive and exclusionary aspects that might be able to be a bit better exposed through kind of rethinking why we do things in a particular way in these kind of moments. But again, I'm not sure how we have those conversations in a kind of productive and healthy way when it's virtual, right? And how to even get knowledge holders to be able to feel like they can comfortably engage in that over this kind of context.
I mean, I think one of the experiences that I will always remember is when I was teaching in Alex's territory, and you welcomed the students with a pipe ceremony. And that was the first time outside of my own ceremonial family where I had seen queerness completely normalized. And it was, and I was watching some of the other Anishinaabe and Cree students also have kind of that same experience. And it's just, it's something that had I watched that or watched a version of that online or in a video, I think that I would have taken the knowledge, but I wouldn't have the same memory. I have such a vivid, joyful, beautiful memory of that day that I'll always sort of carry with me. So yeah, I feel like those relationships are pretty important. But at the same time, I think in sort of looking towards opportunities for students that are in communities where they have those relationships already set up, then this sort of hybrid model can make sense, because they can go and they can work with a knowledge holder and be mentored over a period of time, and then kind of have these, as Lianne said, Zoom check-ins. But I particularly worry about the students that don't have those connections. And that would be using a program like Alex's program, or a program like Dechinta, or the land-based law camps, to make those initial connections, and then kind of carry that through their lives. That particular groups of students, I think, is really hard to reach in this sort of mode of education. Does anyone have anything else? Any other burning topics that they would like to discuss around Indigenous ethics and land-based learning? Questions for each other?
Maybe I'll throw something out. It was it was a conversation with Vince Diaz from Guam, and it was a conversation that he was talking about the climate crisis, right, and how it's impacted a lot of people from his community to even go back or experience the water, experience the land in certain ways because of global warming, because of the shifts to the land or shifts to the water. And so we had this long discussion about virtual reality, and he's been exploring that and, in a sense, talking about ways that people who are either exiled from their land for various reasons, political, otherwise, or are unable to actually experience the land for various reasons, due to climate, due to other forms of injustice, talking about how virtual reality for him might be a way through that conversation. And we had this long discussion about, could you have a basket weaving kind of teaching through virtual reality, where you join up through various locations. And I don't think the technology is there now. So anyway, I just throw that out there as I was a bit taken aback, but I was also kind of intrigued by that possibility. And what are the ethics around that, especially when you are not able to experience the land as you know it, or, as you once knew it, and you don't have that access that would be maybe available to other people.
I was at the University of Minnesota last year, and the School of Architecture, they had this like a week where they were building Indigenous ideas and then looking at ways to further those. And one of the projects there was a Micronesian Voyager canoe, and they did have a virtual reality kind of goggle thing, and it was like I didn't do it. I just wasn't comfortable. I didn't feel it was my place, but the person that was leading that helped them develop it. So I think people are using that technology. And I didn't hear too much of a discussion about the ethics because I wasn't part of that group. I was doing another one. But so I think people have the technology now. And so that'll be something, because it was so appealing, especially to the youth, that they were almost more interested in trying that part than looking at the architecture and understanding how that canoe was put together and learning from the elders about that. So.
So just as a way of is wrapping up, because I'm just being a little bit aware of the time here, are there things that you wish that you had from your institutions in order to support navigating this kind of teaching through the pandemic? Are there things what do you need? What do you need to be effective teachers during COVID-19?
I'll just throw out one thing. At UH, although the president, primarily for economic reasons, announced that our university would be fully face-to-face again, then when we actually went through the logistics of how would that work under social distancing, 6 feet apart kind of requirements, it turns out that most of it has to be hybrid and online. But some of us have been trying to push for tents for outdoor spaces, and it's amazing to me how much more willing our university administration is to put into much more expensive tech gadgetry inside the classrooms, so that, for example, a professor could lecture in a classroom to a small group of students, and that lecture could be then streamed to the rest of the class who's somewhere online, but not willing to spend the money on renting or purchasing tents so that we can meet outside, since it's so much safer to be outside. So that's just one thing that I would say has been really frustrating. It's just, that there's this insistence that it's either face-to-face in a classroom or online in some way. And it's been very difficult to talk to the administration about how being outside is actually a great way to be learning.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, because I think the North is kind of in the same situation as Hawaii, is that what they've noticed is once they clap down on some of the travel, the curve entirely flattened. There was only originally 5 cases, and then once the travel into the territory from outsiders stopped, those cases resolved themselves, and they haven't had any since. Things have changed so fast over the last few months. It's just been a whirlwind where now, initially there's all these demands on our organization to meet certain health standards. It might even be switching now to the point where we're making a strong case that we can carry out programming in a safer way than youth in schools or whatever, as long as we can get some logistics squared up. But it's been very frustrating talking to kind of 2 of our major partners would be Southern institutions like UBC, and then the others are the levels of government. And they don't seem to be, they want to seem to roll out a uniform cookie cutter approach to these issues across time and space, where one is irrelevant for the types of risk management or whatever you wanted, safety protocols that you want to put in place in one. So I've been arguing with UBC about programming in the Northwest Territories in and around Yellowknife, but they just want to put the same policies in place for somewhere like Vancouver onto any sort of programming up north. So if I were to ask something from some of the Southern institutions, it's take the lead from the places in which programming is being offered. The other thing I want some sort of guarantee on, and this is something that really concerns me about this online format, whether it's in the classroom or in a land-based context, is capitalism and state austerity measures are going to come back with a fucking vengeance after this. And it's a small programming like Indigenous studies, land-based programming that I think where in some political context might have weathered their way through the previous 2008 and stuff like that, especially in Canada when reconciliation was all the rage. I feel that we're all going to be exempt from that in this next round because we've never actually seen this before. So I worry I would like some guaranteed political commitment from universities or from the funding agencies that we depend on in order to offer this education, that they're not going to hack us out of existence, or else say, well, you showed you that you could do it online, so why don't we spend less money and offer you money for this type of programming instead of the stuff on the land and informed by community and in community.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of that earlier question, Leanne, what do we need? And, it's usually resources, as Glen was saying, this is the danger of this becoming the new normal at a reduced rate is always there. But for me, it'd be interesting to think about almost a coalition or confederacy of land-based teachers and, having ways that we could support each other, but also, in a sense, be some of the trainers as well around questions of cultural safety, because university profs are being encouraged to do land-based education. And I think in very superficial ways, but also in very reckless ways. And so I think, especially on someone else's territory, I think there needs to be some consideration around, what does cultural safety look like, and ways that we can center Indigenous ways of knowing in that discussion. Whether it be a loose coalition or confederacy or whatever we want to call it. I don't like the word network, so I always avoid that. But I think having those things, and then obviously more resources, so that we can actually there's actually an investment in the community, not just paying honoraria. That the relationship is much deeper, so we can buy equipment that's needed, so that we can buy soil. Cheryl Bryce is doing community garden stuff right now and running around getting soil to different families so that they can grow stuff, so we can get those basics that are needed. And it's beyond just a pedagogical moment with certain knowledge holders, right? So that it continues on. So that's, so it's not us always asking for more, that we're funded with the community needs in mind.
Yeah, I agree on that one too. It's land-based is becoming such a fad over here. And I know even in our college and university, it's like all of a sudden everyone's doing land-based, but really are they? And what exactly are they doing? Like our undergrad program has a required course now on pedagogies of place. And some of the people, like it's, are required for all the pre-service teachers, which is great, but some of the people teaching it like really have no connection to Indigenous communities, and then they just end up emailing the Indigenous faculty saying, can you do this or that, or how do I infuse Indigenous knowledge? Like you can just email to ask that. So that's, I guess, another ethical element to that is the, like, not vetting, I don't want to use that term either, but just like who is doing land-based, who's doing Indigenous land-based, and the distinction between that and outdoor ed and place-based ed and critical environmental education, all those kind of programs that are out there. And I was looking at some of the research that was funded at U of S, and a lot of it has land-based in the title. And it's like, I know that it's not, like some of them are sponsored by Cameco. So how can you do land-based education sponsored by a uranium mining company, right? So another ethical kind of issue. But one of my colleagues said the other day at our faculty meeting, she said to me, well, you sure are lucky you found a way to never have to go to the university. So it's like she was saying it in an underhanded way, like meaning that I've like tricked the system somehow. Like, well, I didn't cause COVID, but yeah, education doesn't have to be in buildings. Why does it? But there's this kind of this snickering about land-based, like we're not legit or something. And so I think having a coalition or whatever of land-based educators would be a good idea, as long as it's not too formalized and people feel left out or whatever. There's a way to keep it, loosely organized, I guess, so we can support one another. And then maybe that would help too with kind of emotional support during COVID, because as educators, we're hearing all our students' stories too, and then we have all our families and all that. So it's like we have that added layer of accountability now with all the issues that our students are having too during this time.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of something similar to both Leanne and Alex around, like, to me, one of the things I think land-based educational programs have done so well is address like what to me are two of the biggest issues facing so many of us students and teachers alike, is like what to do about our families and what to do about like emotional and mental well-being. And you know, at least I found like in my limited experience with Dechinta, those were things that were thought about constantly, and many policies and practices put in place to address that on an ongoing basis. That to me feels really absent from the conversations, other than like my university has said you can make a request to have your teaching load kind of shifted, where you still have to do all the work. You just have to do like some of it later, which I think isn't going to actually help anybody through this, right? But, you know, I personally have found it incredibly challenging to get anything done. And I think a lot of that is because of the mode, right? That like, as someone who brought my child out to law camps with me, it was very easy to teach and engage with people and do all that work in a land-based kind of way that I find has been completely unsustainable through online forums. And so I find that this kind of move to online forums is just creating kind of deeper kind of divisions and separation from both kind of emotional and mental well-being and kind of family holistic care that I think are also just really amplified in this moment. So that's, you know, I don't know what I would expect the university to do, other than I think this is a real moment where they could actually turn to land-based programs to start thinking through how they might be able to support students, staff, and faculty better if, you know, they have to continue to respond to the pandemic through the summer and fall, and however long this goes on, because that's the one place I think the university, well, there's many, but that's one place I think the universities are failing kind of greatly at. So
I think that's a really good point around the holistic family nature of land-based education and our program. And I think that's why we have so many women applying to our program, because we provide that childcare. And I'm just thinking of how much Luca, Lianne's child, illuminated and taught us and taught the students, and how much they connected with Luca as well. And that's another part that gets lost in Zoom. I think this gang of Indigenous land-based educators is a really great thing, and it would be great to apply to a Sure Connections grant to all get together on the land when this is over, and invite our other colleagues who are doing this kind of work. That would be really great. It's so uplifting just to see all your faces, even on Zoom. And I'm so appreciative that you were able to take this time and spend with us. And I do really hear the frustration in your voice, Leanne, and Noelani's voice, and Glen as well, in terms of how much you've had to advocate at your institutions to be able to do land-based education, and Alex as well, in the first place, and then have them be able to pivot around the pandemic and move to a completely different mode of learning so quickly, when it's so difficult to even get a tent. So that really is illuminating the politics of colonialism in all of this.